I never thought a small garden could spark a power struggle, but when Karen, the tyrant disguised as the whole president, used every trick in the book to force me to tear down my garden, she had no idea that her greed and abuse of power would push the entire hoe to the brink of bankruptcy and lead to her own downfall. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. I am a retired businessman enjoying a peaceful life in an upscale residential neighborhood where everything is managed by the Homeowners Association. I love gardening and spend a lot of time tending to my small yet beautiful front yard, which is filled with rose bushes, a small fountain, and a lush green lawn. But that peace didn't last long. One quiet autumn morning, I was sipping my coffee on the sofa when I heard a commotion outside my house. The sharp clatter of high heels echoed on the stone pathway, breaking the serene silence, followed by muttered complaints. These damn flowers. I peeked out the window, Karen. She was yanking out the roses I had carefully nurtured for months. I shot outside like a rocket and grabbed her hand. What the hell are you doing? She jerked her arm free, standing there with her arms crossed, her gaze as sharp as a knife. In her other hand was a thick stack of neatly clipped documents, as if she had meticulously prepared for battle. You need to fix this garden, she said coldly, devoid of any emotion. It doesn't comply with host standards. These are the regulations. I glanced at my garden, now with a few broken rose stems, then turned back to her. My eyes locked onto her rigid expression. What regulations? I've never seen any clause in the agreement that prohibits residents from growing plants in their own yards. Karen smirked, a calculated, smug smile. She raised the stack of documents, tapping the cover as if to emphasize her authority. It's all in here. You have 7 days to get rid of this ridiculous garden. If not, the hoe will step in. I stared at her, my voice calm, but my gaze now ice cold. I've put so much effort into taking care of this garden. It's not just a piece of land, it's my joy, my life. I have no intention of changing anything. You have no right to destroy it like this. Karen narrowed her eyes, her tone dropping into a low, menacing threat. I am the president of the whole. I have the right. I didn't care what she said. I turned back to tend to my poor, crushed flowers. Seeing the broken petals stirred something deep inside me. Karen shot me a glare before tossing out one final threat. Then you'll soon face the consequences. I smirked slightly, my expression unreadable. We'll see about that. Sure enough, Karen wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, as I stepped outside to grab my newspaper, a thick white envelope sat ominously in my mailbox. The sender's address was clearly stamped, Homeowners Association, HO. A sense of unease settled in my chest. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. The first line, printed in bold, was a clear warning. Notice of violation. Deadline for compliance. Below that was a hefty fine and an uncompromising warning. If you do not comply with the regulations, we will be forced to take serious action. I clenched the paper tightly, my eyes quickly scanning the list of violations. All nonsense. And it wasn't just me. Several neighbors had received similar letters. A simmering wave of discontent began spreading through the neighborhood. That afternoon, as I was trimming the rose bushes in front of my porch, a silent shadow stretched across the grass. Can I talk to you for a moment? I turned around. It was Mr. John, the elderly neighbor who had lived here for over 3 decades. He glanced around cautiously, then lowered his voice as he stepped closer. I have to speak quietly, because Karen might have eyes and ears everywhere. I frowned, set my shears down, and gestured for him to continue. You have a beautiful garden, John whispered, then cast a quick glance toward the end of the street, where Karen's house, the whole president's residence, stood tall. But do you know, She's dangerous. Once she sets her sights on someone, that person is in trouble. Big trouble. I cross my arms, my gaze steady. I know she's not easy to deal with, but if we stay silent, she'll only get worse. It's time to push back. John sighed, shaking his head. Aren't you afraid? Karen can rally the entire hoe against you. She could sue you, make your life a living hell. I silently appreciated John's concern for me. Maybe he didn't realize who I was. I smirked. I've been through some of the toughest negotiations of my life, going head to head with people far more ambitious than Karen. A small hoe like this won't make me back down. I looked John straight in the eye, my voice firm. Karen is not the most formidable opponent I've ever faced. John was quiet for a moment, then gave a small nod. I hope you're right, because if you're not, he swallowed dryly, his eyes filled with worry. There will be war. I watched as the old man walked away, my heart heavy. A light evening breeze drifted by, carrying the faint scent of roses. But in the air, I sensed something else, the scent of confrontation. That night, I sat under the desk lamp, a thick stack of documents in front of me. Every page carried another layer of pressure on the residents of this neighborhood, from absurd fines to meaningless rules imposed by the Hoe. I carefully read each line, scrutinizing every clause, until I found a crucial loophole. The Hoe could not enforce anything without the agreement of at least two-thirds of the residents. I smirked. This game wasn't over yet. The next morning, I called a lawyer specializing in real estate. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and by the time it ended, I had all the information I needed to protect myself. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed people to stand with me. That evening, I invited a group of residents to my house. The atmosphere was tense at first, everyone wary. Karen, the whole president, had instilled a fear in them, the fear of chaos if they didn't comply with the Hoe. But as I began presenting the facts, the smoldering anger within them ignited. Sarah, a young woman, spoke up in frustration. I got fined just for hanging a small swing in my backyard. This is our home, not a military camp. A middle-aged man slammed his hand on the table, his eyes burning with rage. We've let her run wild for too long. The whole belongs to us, not just her. I looked at them, nodding firmly. If we stand together, we can change everything. But first, I need your support at the upcoming whole meeting. Friday night, the whole meeting room was packed. A heavy tension filled the air as Karen stood at the podium, her sharp gaze sweeping over everyone. She smirked, her voice cold and cutting. He is a dissenter. If we don't deal with him now, this neighborhood will fall into chaos. I stood up, holding my stack of documents, my voice calm but sharp. Madam, I have a few questions. According to the whole regulations, any enforcement decision must be approved by at least two-thirds of the residents. I have a list of those who oppose these unreasonable fines. Furthermore, by law, the Hoe has no right to demand that I change my garden if it does not pose a danger or negatively impact the community. Karen's face paled for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure, her voice cold. That doesn't matter. The board has decided. I scanned the room, where skeptical looks were beginning to appear. Stepping forward, my voice firm. If I'm wrong, I will change my garden. But if you're wrong, I want the Hoe to issue a public apology and refund all unjust fines. The room fell so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Karen clenched her fists, her eyes darkening. You think you can challenge me? I smiled, responding calmly. I'm not challenging you. I just want fairness for all of us. The murmurs grew louder. Some residents began nodding in agreement. Karen knew she was losing control. This battle wasn't over. But I knew my counterattack had struck her weakest point. She wouldn't let this go. That afternoon, under the crimson glow of the setting sun, I walked home slowly, feeling at ease after a long day. But as soon as I opened the gate, I froze. The sight before me made my heart clench. The garden, my greatest pride, where I had poured in so much effort, was now nothing but ruin. The rose bushes I had nurtured with care were crushed, their deep red petals scattered across the path like bloodstains. The intricate fountain in the center of the garden was now a pile of rubble, its shattered pieces reflecting the dimming light. The once lush green lawn, where I had spent countless hours reading and watching the sky, was now barren, marred with tire tracks and uprooted stumps. Whole workers in uniform were still lingering around, some packing up their tools, others casually chatting as if they hadn't just destroyed a thriving sanctuary. And in the midst of it all, Karen stood there. She looked like a smug queen, draped in an expensive dark dress, holding a steaming Starbucks cup in her hand. When she saw me, there was no hint of regret or remorse in her eyes. Instead, she smirked, a smile full of arrogance and triumph. I warned you. She sipped her coffee, her voice chillingly indifferent. No one goes against the hoe. I felt my entire body tremble, but not out of fear, out of rage. My breath came in sharp bursts, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails nearly dug into my skin. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. When I finally spoke, my voice was so cold that even I barely recognized it. You used whole funds for this? Karen shrugged, as if my question was meaningless. Of course, she smirked. This is for the benefit of the community. I looked around, wondering, which community? Which community would be happy to see a garden destroyed? Who would feel better when a lush green space turned into a soulless patch of dirt? Or was this merely a power play? A lesson Karen wanted to teach me, to remind me that I was nothing compared to her power. Karen probably thought she had won. But there was one thing she didn't know. This game was far from over. And next time, the one to fall would not be me. Not even in her wildest dreams could Karen have imagined that the whole fund she was using to ruin my yard, 90% of it was funded by me. I had always hoped for a peaceful life in this neighborhood when I retired. I never hesitated to contribute money to improve our community. But this time, it was too much. Right after the incident, I withdrew all my funding from the hole. It didn't take a month for the system to start crumbling. The once clean streets were now covered in fallen leaves. Lawns, left untrimmed, grew wild like an untamed forest. The street lights flickered erratically every night, like ghostly figures lurking in the dark. The swimming pool turned green with algae, its water murky. Maintenance services were halted, unpaid bills piled up. Residents began to lose patience. At first, they only complained, but whispers turned into outrage when someone uncovered suspicious financial reports. The truth came to light. Karen had been embezzling the whole funds. They were furious. Some marched straight to Karen's house to confront her. Others called their lawyers. Lawsuits started piling up. The once peaceful neighborhood was now filled with tension, suspicion, and anger. Karen, who once walked with confidence in her expensive dresses, who once arrogantly gave orders to the entire community, now looked gaunt and panicked. She held an emergency meeting, desperately trying to calm the residents. But no one believed her anymore. As she stepped onto the podium, her voice trembled. It was just a minor mismanagement of funds. I assure you everything will be fine. The crowd had no patience left. Someone shouted, mismanagement. You call stealing tens of thousands of dollars a mismanagement? Everything will be fine. Do you even know what we've been through? Bills are piling up. The hoe is drowning in debt. Do you think we're idiots? Accusations flew from all directions. Karen was forced to step back, cornered with no way out. And then she discovered an even more horrifying truth. I was the HOA's primary donor. That fact was revealed in a meeting of the remaining board members. One of them, perhaps out of sheer desperation, spoke up. We need to find a way to negotiate with him. He's the biggest financial supporter of the HOA. Karen was stunned. Her face turned pale. Him? Who do you mean? The person glanced at her as if they couldn't believe she still hadn't realized it. Him. The one whose yard you ordered to be destroyed. The entire room fell silent. Karen stood frozen, feeling as if the world beneath her feet was collapsing. How could she not have known? All this time, she had thought of herself as the supreme authority in the neighborhood, the one who controlled the whole. But it turned out the very lifeblood of the organization she managed came from the person she had foolishly opposed the most. Realizing the truth too late, Karen turned pale. Her confidence shattered like glass crashing onto a cold stone floor. That night, there was a knock on my door. I leisurely opened it, and there stood Karen, her face as white as a corpse. Her eyes were sunken, her once perfectly groomed hair now a disheveled mess, and the dress she wore was wrinkled as if she had just walked out of a nightmare. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been crying all day. I, the hoe is facing some financial difficulties. If you could support us again. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaned against the doorframe, and looked at her with an icy calmness. Oh, so now you need me? Karen almost choked on her own words. She swallowed dryly, her eyes filled with desperation. If you don't fund us, the whole will go bankrupt, and everyone will blame me. I looked around. Several residents were standing at a distance, silently watching. No one came to help Karen. No one showed her any sympathy. I let out a faint chuckle, my voice as light as the wind, but as sharp as a blade. Perhaps you should have thought about that. Before you ordered my yard to be torn down. Karen froze. Her mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She understood. It was over. The next day, the residents held a vote. Karen was removed from her position as whole president by a landslide. But that was only the beginning. A few weeks later, she was officially sued. Legal documents rained down on her like an endless storm. The residents demanded their money back. The local newspapers covered the story. People called her the whole embezzler. The cold stares from neighbors, the pressure of lawsuits, the mounting debts, all of it suffocated her. With no way out, Karen was forced to sell her house and leave the neighborhood. The day Karen left, no one saw her off. She stood on her front steps, her suitcase lying haphazardly beside her. From a distance, eyes followed her, not with pity, not with regret. Just a heavy silence and the lonely figure of someone who had destroyed themselves. Afterward, the residents rebuilt the hull in a fairer way. I hired a new landscaping team. They restored my garden, this time even more beautiful than before. The flowers were more vibrant, the grass greener. Each stone in the pathway was carefully laid once again. A resident walked up, arms crossed, giving me a small smile. Do you feel satisfied? I brushed the dirt off my hands, gazing at the radiant garden under the sunlight. Satisfied? I smiled, my eyes calm. I don't need to feel satisfied. I just need to see justice served. What do you think of the story? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to follow us to stay updated on the latest stories.